I spent 2 years building the one place that brought me peace. Every flower, every stone, every inch of soil, it all meant something. Then one morning, my rich neighbor drove his SUV straight through it like it was garbage. No apology. No remorse. Just a shrug, and a broken world behind him. But what he destroyed didn't stay buried. Because what he crushed in seconds ended up changing his life forever. You never really think about how much something means to you until it's taken away. That's exactly what happened to me the day my garden was destroyed, not by nature, not by accident, but by my next-door neighbor's luxury SUV. It all started on a Saturday morning. The kind where everything feels perfect. The sky was clear, the air had that crisp spring smell, and I had just finished planting a new row of marigolds along the path. I remember wiping the soil from my gloves and smiling to myself, proud of how things were finally coming together. That garden wasn't just a hobby, it was my sanctuary. Every flower had been planted with care, every stone placed with intention. After a tough year of personal loss and job instability, that little patch of green was the one thing I could control. The one thing that gave me peace. Then came the screech. A horrible, metallic roar tore through the quiet, followed by a loud crash. I didn't even have time to process it. I dropped my trowel and ran toward the sound. My heart was pounding before I even turned the corner of my house, and then I saw it. My entire front garden, ripped apart. Crushed flower beds. Broken stones. My custom-built arbor snapped in half like it was made of matchsticks. And there, sitting in the middle of the wreckage like a smug metal beast, was a gleaming black Range Rover. The front bumper was wedged into what used to be my lavender bush. Smoke puffed from under the hood. The grill looked like it was grinning at me. And stepping out of that car like nothing had happened was Marcus Langston. Now let me tell you about Marcus. He's the kind of neighbor who makes you feel like you're trespassing on your own sidewalk. His house is 3 times the size of mine, with spotless white walls and pillars like a courthouse. He never waves. Never smiles. Just nods if you pass him in the grocery store, and only if you're standing directly in his line of sight. The man wore dress shirts to water his lawn and had a robotic mower that probably cost more than my entire garden. When he saw me standing there, muddy gloves still on my hands and a look of utter disbelief on my face, he didn't even apologize. Not at first. He looked at the damage, then back at me, and said, "I lost control for a second. Sorry about that." Just like that. As if he'd spilled a drink on my carpet, not mowed through months of my hard work. I opened my mouth, trying to stay calm, but all I could manage was, "You destroyed everything." He brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve. "It's just a garden. My insurance will cover it. Just a garden." I felt something inside me crack, not just because of the words, but the way he said them. Cold. Detached. Like my world being turned upside down was an inconvenience for him. I looked down at the wreckage, at my crushed ceramic pots, my uprooted tomato plants. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but fury. "You could have killed someone," I said. "What if I had been standing there?" He shrugged. Shrugged. "But you weren't." Before I could say another word, he pulled out his phone and started dialing. "I'll have someone take care of the damage. Don't worry." And then he walked back into his house, leaving tire tracks and devastation behind like it was just another Tuesday. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move. My neighbor, Sandra, eventually came out with a cup of tea and put a hand on my shoulder. She didn't say much. Just gave me that look, the one people give when they know something sacred has been broken. Later that afternoon, Marcus's assistant, yes, assistant, came over to inspect the damage. He had a clipboard and an air of forced politeness. He asked if I had receipts for the plants. Receipts. I told him I didn't keep track of things like that, because my garden wasn't a business, it was personal. He smiled awkwardly and said they'd be in touch. Days passed. Then a week. No one fixed anything. No landscapers showed up. No calls from insurance. Just silence. Every time I looked outside, I felt a mix of helplessness and anger boil in my chest. Marcus acted like it never happened. He threw a cocktail party that weekend. I saw people laughing on his deck while my crushed roses wilted in the sun. I tried to call. Left a note. Even walked up to his house and rang the doorbell. No answer. I began to realize, he wasn't just ignoring the damage. He was ignoring me. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to stay silent. I took pictures. Documented everything. I posted a thread on my neighborhood forum, not with rage or insults, but with raw honesty. Photos of what my garden used to be, what it had become, and how Marcus had treated it like roadkill. The response was immediate. People I'd never spoken to started commenting, sharing their own stories. Apparently, Marcus had a reputation. There was the time he reversed into someone's mailbox and blamed the streetlights. Or when his dog tore up a kid's soccer net, and he offered to Venmo a few bucks. But none of it ever stuck. He was rich. Untouchable. A master of writing checks and erasing guilt. But not this time. Because I wasn't going to settle for a check. I wanted something more. I wanted him to see what he'd done, not just to my property, but to a part of me I couldn't rebuild with money. I didn't know it then, but that garden, and what he did to it, would change everything. Because what started as a wreck would soon unravel the life of the man who caused it. And by the end, Marcus Langston wouldn't just pay for what he'd done. He'd cry for it. The morning after I posted about the garden, I woke up to over 100 notifications on my phone. It was surreal. My simple post, just a few heartfelt paragraphs and some before and after photos, had exploded. The comments section was flooded with support. People from the neighborhood, folks from 2 blocks over, even some who didn't live nearby but had heard stories about Marcus, were chiming in. It wasn't just sympathy, it was outrage. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was about someone who thought they were above accountability. I remember scrolling through one comment that said, "It's about time someone called him out. He acts like he owns the whole block." Another one read, "This is what happens when money replaces character." It made me feel something I hadn't felt in days: validation. The thread was shared on a local Facebook group. Then someone from the community newsletter messaged me asking if they could feature the story. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. I wanted to show what happens when power goes unchecked. But Marcus? He stayed silent. Not a word. Not a note. Not a knock on my door. Until one afternoon, something strange happened. I was outside, trying to salvage what little I could from the mess. I had an old crate filled with bulbs that might still bloom if given a chance, and I was on my knees, carefully brushing dirt off one of the surviving roots, when I heard footsteps on gravel. I looked up. There he was, Marcus Langston, standing on the edge of my lawn, hands in the pockets of his sharply tailored slacks, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. We stared at each other for a few seconds, the air between us heavy. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know it meant that much to you." I blinked. "That was it?" I stood slowly, brushing dirt off my jeans. "You still don't get it, do you?" His mouth tightened. "I read your post. Then you saw what you destroyed. And how little you seem to care." He nodded. "I'm not good at things like this. Emotions. Apologies. But I'm trying." I tilted my head. "You're trying now because people are watching." He flinched. A very subtle movement, but I caught it. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, quieter this time. "The car, it malfunctioned." I sighed. "And your heart? Did that malfunction too?" For the first time, he looked away. Not out of arrogance. Out of shame. "I know you think I'm just some rich guy who doesn't care," he said. "And maybe I've acted like that. But I wasn't always like this." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to stay angry, but something in his voice cracked. He looked back at the crushed fountain, now covered in weeds. "My mother used to garden. She loved it. When I was a kid, we couldn't afford vacations, so our backyard was our paradise. She taught me how to plant hydrangeas. She died before I turned 18. I swallowed hard. It wasn't what I expected. "Then why would you treat mine like it was disposable?" I asked. "Because I forgot," he said simply. "And people stopped holding me accountable a long time ago." He pulled something out of his coat pocket. A small, wrinkled photo. He handed it to me. It was old, faded, a boy sitting in a garden, dirt on his knees, grinning. A woman beside him with a sun hat and gloves. They looked happy. "That was the last summer we had together," he said. "After that, I buried it. All of it." I stood there, unsure of what to feel. This man, who had plowed through my piece without blinking, was now opening a door I didn't know existed. And the tears in his eyes? They weren't forced. They were real. But that didn't mean he was off the hook. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said. "But a real apology comes with action. Words are just wind." He nodded slowly, took the photo back, and walked away. The next day, something remarkable happened. At exactly 9 a.m., a team of landscapers showed up. Not just any landscapers, specialists. They brought trays of flowers, custom-built trellises, even rare soil blends. I tried to stop them at first, thinking it was another PR stunt. But they told me Marcus had hired them with specific instructions. Rebuild it exactly as it was. No shortcuts. No substitutions. Spare no expense. I didn't know what to think. A few days later, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't Marcus. It was his assistant again, holding a leather-bound folder. Inside was a handwritten letter. Marcus had written every word himself. I could tell by the uneven pen strokes, the occasional scribbled out line. It was an apology, but more than that, it was a confession. About how he had let money replace connection. About how he used to care, but somewhere along the way, he started to believe that things could be bought and people could be silenced. And then came the part that shook me. "I'm rebuilding your garden," he wrote. "But not as repayment. Consider it a tribute. To your strength. To what I forgot. And to the woman who taught me what gardens mean in the first place." He enclosed a check too. A sizable one. Enough not just to cover the damages, but to upgrade and expand, if I wanted. But I didn't cash it. Instead, I pinned the letter to my corkboard. Because that was the real payment, a change in him. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more than just my garden coming back to life. Marcus changed. Slowly, but noticeably. He started waving at neighbors. He helped an elderly couple with their groceries. He planted a small flower bed in his own yard, something he hadn't done in years. One morning, I caught him kneeling in the dirt, carefully laying down mulch around a young rose bush. He looked up at me and smiled. "I still remember how she said to do it," he said. I smiled back. "Looks good." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Would you help me plant the next one?" And just like that, something bloomed between us. Not just forgiveness, but growth. Sometimes, it's the smallest things that mark the biggest changes. A flower sprouting from freshly turned soil. A wave from a neighbor who never used to make eye contact. The sound of shared laughter across a fence. All signs of life returning. And in our case, signs that the frost between two houses had finally thawed. 3 weeks after Marcus crashed through my garden, 3 long, emotional, surprisingly healing weeks, the last stone in my new pathway was set. The garden wasn't just restored. It was reborn. Brighter. Bolder. And filled with things I never thought I'd plant again, like trust, and community, and even friendship. I still remember that Saturday morning. The same kind of clear sky, same gentle breeze as the day everything was destroyed. But this time, the garden was alive with neighbors, people who showed up with lemonade, cookies, folding chairs, and curiosity. Marcus had suggested a garden reopening, and to my own surprise I agreed. Not because I wanted attention, but because it felt right. Like closure. Like a full circle. He showed up early, in jeans and a plain t-shirt, something I never thought I'd see him wear. No assistant. No sunglasses. Just Marcus, holding a tray of seedlings. "I brought these," he said, holding them out like a peace offering. "Hydrangeas. The kind my mom used to plant." I took them with a nod. "Let's put them by the old fountain spot. It gets good light now." And so we planted them together. Side by side. No tension. No awkwardness. Just quiet work and shared purpose. People began arriving soon after. Sandra from across the street. The Thompsons with their 2 boys. Even Mrs. Pelton, who rarely left her porch, came with a sun hat and a broad smile. Everyone marveled at the transformation. The arbor was rebuilt, stronger, and covered in climbing jasmine. The vegetable beds were bigger now, and there was even a little bench nestled under a flowering dogwood. But more than the physical beauty, what struck people most was the story behind it. How something broken had become something better. And yes, people noticed Marcus. He mingled. He listened. He even laughed. One little girl offered him a dandelion, and instead of brushing it off, he tucked it behind his ear with exaggerated grace, making her giggle uncontrollably. No one could believe the change. But I could. Because I'd seen it happen day by day. The truth is, I think something inside Marcus had been trying to grow for a long time. It just needed the right soil. The crash, awful as it was, forced open a part of him that had been buried for years. And oddly enough, I understood that. Because hadn't I done the same? Buried my grief in soil? Turned pain into petals? Later that day, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped behind the trees, Marcus and I sat on the bench together. Just watching the wind sway through the tall grasses. "I owe you more than an apology," he said quietly. "This garden, it brought something back I thought I'd lost." I looked at him and smiled. "Then we're even. Because it gave me something too." He nodded slowly. "What's that?" "Hope. That people can change. That something beautiful can still grow, even after it's been crushed." He didn't speak for a moment. Then his eyes shimmered, and he reached into his pocket. "I have something," he said, pulling out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a tiny silver charm. A spade and flower engraved with the words, "From wreckage we bloom." "I had it made," he said, a little embarrassed. "I thought maybe you could hang it in the garden. As a reminder. Of what was, and what came after." I held it in my palm, the metal warm from his hand. "It's perfect." We hung it on the arbor, right above the entrance. And from that day on, everyone who walked through it saw those words, a quiet echo of a loud story. A symbol of transformation. And speaking of change, it didn't stop with Marcus. The community, once fragmented and distant, started coming together. People began tending to their own gardens. Sharing cuttings. Swapping seeds. Marcus even started hosting Sunday morning coffee gatherings, something I never would have imagined before. The garden became a gathering place. A peace offering. A bridge. And one day, I looked out the window and saw Marcus kneeling beside a little boy, helping him plant a daffodil. The same man who once crushed my garden without blinking was now teaching a child how to nurture life from the dirt. It nearly brought me to tears. And maybe that's the point. This story didn't end with a lawsuit or a settlement. It didn't end in bitterness. It began, with growth. Real, messy, human growth. People often think that healing comes after an apology. But sometimes, healing comes before, and makes the apology possible. It's strange to say, but I'm glad the crash happened. Not because of the damage, but because of what it uncovered. Beneath all that anger and silence was someone who just needed to remember what it felt like to care. And beneath all my fear of confrontation was a woman learning to speak up for what she loves. In the end, Marcus didn't just rebuild my garden. He rebuilt a part of himself. And I got my sanctuary back. Stronger, wilder, more vibrant than ever. So now, when people walk past and ask about the charm on the arbor, I tell them the story. Not with bitterness, but with pride. Because that garden, and everything that bloomed from its destruction, taught me the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the deepest messes.